My gorgeous wife changed after her work business trip and wanted an open relationship. About 6 or 7 months ago, I started noticing subtle but undeniable changes in my wife, Carla. She had just returned from her company's annual retreat, an event her manager organized each year to strengthen their team's camaraderie. Normally, she'd come back from these trips energized, eager to share funny or interesting stories about her colleagues, and excited to talk about the little moments that had stood out to her. But this time, something was off. From the moment she stepped through the door, there was a noticeable distance in the way she carried herself. She barely spoke about the trip, which struck me as odd. When I casually asked if anything unusual had happened, she simply shook her head and dismissed my concerns, acting as if there was nothing worth mentioning. At first, I figured she was just drained from all the travel, social events, and team-building exercises. It made sense. Long work trips could be exhausting. But even as days passed, her mood didn't improve. If anything, things only got worse. Carla seemed more irritable than usual, snapping at me over insignificant things that never would have bothered her before. Our relationship had always been relatively smooth. We rarely fought, and when we did, it was over minor disagreements that never lingered. But suddenly, everything felt tense. It was as if she was actively looking for reasons to argue, and our once light-hearted conversations now felt like walking through a minefield. Jokes that used to make her laugh now earned the exasperated sighs, or, worse, outright hostility. I couldn't figure out where this sudden resentment was coming from. The arguments weren't the only thing that changed. Carla started pulling away in other ways, too. We had a long-standing tradition of going on weekly dates. Not necessarily anything extravagant, just small moments we set aside to reconnect, whether it was grabbing coffee together or taking a relaxing walk in the park. Those little rituals had always been important to us. But she started canceling at the last minute, offering weak excuses that didn't quite add up. She'd claimed she was too tired, too busy, or needed to catch up on work, even on weekends when we both knew she had nothing urgent to do. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The more she pulled away, the more I missed her, the connection we had, the way we used to share our lives so effortlessly. Her mood swings became even more erratic. One moment, she seemed fine, almost like her old self, and the next, she'd be cold and withdrawn, lost in her own thoughts. Of course, my mind started to wander. Was she falling out of love with me? Or worse, had she fallen for someone else? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't ignore the way she was acting. Something was wrong, and I felt completely powerless to stop it. When I finally confronted her, asking if there was someone else, she was quick to deny it, insisting that I was overanalyzing everything. She even made me feel like I was being paranoid, telling me I was imagining things, and that she just needed some space to sort through personal matters. I wanted to trust her, so I did what she asked. I stepped back, gave her the breathing room she claimed she needed, hoping that with time, whatever was weighing on her would resolve itself. I convinced myself that if I didn't push, she would eventually return to me, and we could find our way back to how things used to be. But instead of bringing us closer, the distance between us only grew. Carla started spending more and more time at work, coming home late, sometimes even after I'd already gone to bed. She used to tell me about her day, sharing office gossip or funny anecdotes about her coworkers. Now, all I got was silence. When she was home, she was evasive, brushing off my questions or changing the subject whenever I tried to get a read on what was going on with her. The secrecy, the late nights, it all gnawed at me, filling my mind with doubts I didn't want to entertain. With our marriage clearly unraveling, I suggested we try couples therapy. Maybe with the help of a counselor, we could talk openly and figure out what was creating this divide between us. To my surprise, Carla refused outright. She said she needed to see a therapist on her own first, that she had personal issues she needed to work through before we could focus on our marriage. It wasn't the solution I had hoped for, but I didn't want to stand in the way of her getting help. If this was what she needed, I was willing to support her. She quickly found a therapist and started attending sessions 3 times a week, each lasting 2 hours. I didn't pry too much. I wanted to respect her space and trust that she was talking to someone who could genuinely help. All I wanted was for her to find clarity, some kind of peace that would ultimately bring us closer again. At first, it seemed to be working. She appeared lighter, as if some invisible burden had been lifted. For a brief moment, I let myself believe that maybe things were finally turning around. But instead of bringing us back together, her behavior only became more bizarre. Carla's time away from home only increased, and before I knew it, she was making plans that didn't include me on a regular basis. At first, it was just an evening here and there, but soon, it became a weekly pattern. She'd leave without much explanation, only to return late at night, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I never had an issue with her going out with friends. I always encouraged her to have a social life outside of our marriage, but I did expect some level of communication. The way she constantly disappeared without telling me where she was going made me feel like an afterthought in my own home. And what stung the most was that she seemed completely indifferent to how much I missed spending time with her, as if our connection no longer mattered. Then came the moment that shattered any lingering hope I had left. By sheer accident, I found out that Carla wasn't just hanging out with friends during her nights out. She was also spending time with complete strangers, men she met at bars. I had no idea this was happening until some of my own friends reached out, concerned. They had seen her, recognizing her instantly as my wife, dancing with random guys, visibly intoxicated, acting in ways that felt completely out of character. Hearing about my wife's behavior secondhand was humiliating. It wasn't just the shock of what she was doing. It was the fact that other people knew before I did. While I had been sitting at home wondering what went wrong, she was out there, making a spectacle of herself in front of people who knew me. The embarrassment, the confusion, it was overwhelming. When I finally confronted her, hoping to have an honest conversation about what was going on, she brushed it off like it was nothing. She told me she was just having fun, that dancing and talking to strangers didn't mean she was doing anything wrong. She acted like I was the unreasonable one for being upset, as if I had no right to feel hurt by the fact that my wife was out there acting like a single woman. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, she stopped contributing to the household altogether. Since the beginning of our marriage, we had always divided responsibilities fairly. I handled the cooking and made sure we both had meals packed for the day. Carla took care of the dishes, loading and unloading the dishwasher, and she managed the laundry while I folded and put everything away. I also took care of the yard work. It was a system that worked well for us. But seemingly out of nowhere, Carla began refusing to do her part. She started complaining that she felt burdened by housework, claiming that none of her friends had to juggle both their jobs and chores at home. It struck me as odd because, up until this point, she had never once voiced any resentment about our arrangement. I tried to be understanding, but I couldn't ignore the reality of our situation. I pointed out that many of her neighborhood friends she was referring to were stay-at-home wives. Their entire day was dedicated to managing their homes, which naturally meant they had fewer responsibilities outside of that. I even offered a solution. If she felt overwhelmed balancing both work and house duties, I told her she could quit her job and take care of the home full-time. I would happily take on the financial burden alone if it made her feel less stressed. But if she wanted to keep working, then she had to accept that we both needed to contribute to maintaining our home. After all, I never complained about my share of the work, so why was she suddenly acting like she was being treated unfairly? Her response was infuriating. She insisted she wasn't going to do housework anymore. She claimed that her job was already too demanding, and that she didn't want to come home just to work again. She told me, straight to my face, that I needed to take over everything, at least until she decided she was ready to help again. And just like that, the burden of running our entire household fell on me. I was the one cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, and making sure everything stayed in order. At first, I hoped that if I just kept going, she'd eventually see how hard I was trying, that she'd appreciate the effort I was putting in. But that never happened. Then, just when I thought she couldn't hurt me any more than she already had, I discovered something that left me reeling. Apparently, for the past 2 months, Carla had been going around the neighborhood spreading lies about me, telling anyone who would listen that I was controlling and toxic, that I never let her be herself. I found out through some of my friends, men whose wives were close to Carla. These friends, men who had known me for years, came to me out of concern, wanting to understand what was really going on. They told me that Carla had painted me as some kind of oppressive husband, someone who had stifled her freedom and made her feel trapped in our marriage. And when people pressed her for details, asking what exactly I had done to make her feel this way, she told them that over the years, she had come to see me as too rigid, too close-minded, and that I had kept her from experiencing life to the fullest. She claimed that she had begun to feel unfulfilled in our marriage, and that meeting new men had helped her rediscover the parts of herself she had lost. But the worst part? She told them she had started having fantasies about being with other men, about exploring her femininity in ways she felt she never could with me. At first, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This didn't sound like Carla at all. She had always been private about our relationship, someone who avoided airing personal issues, especially to friends and acquaintances. And why would she lie about me like this? I had never controlled her or held her back from doing anything. If anything, for months, she had been living however she pleased while I silently stood by, hoping things would get better. Yet now, out of nowhere, she was painting me as the problem, as if I had been suffocating her all along. I needed answers, so I confronted her directly. I told her what my friends had shared with me and asked if it was true, if she had really been going around telling people that I was toxic and controlling. I wanted to hear it from her, to understand why she felt the need to say those things. To my shock, Carla didn't deny it. She admitted, with a disturbing level of calm, that she had spoken to others about her feelings, explaining that she had been feeling unfulfilled in our marriage and needed an outlet to express her frustrations. I asked her to clarify exactly what she meant. That's when she started talking about her therapy sessions, about how her therapist had helped her see what was missing in her life: excitement. She told me, in the most detached tone, that she had come to view me as boring, predictable, and lacking passion. Her words cut deep. I had always believed that we had built a fulfilling life together, that she had been content with the love and stability we shared. I reminded her of all the times she had expressed happiness, the way we had always made an effort to balance our relationship. But instead of acknowledging any of it, she accused me of holding on to outdated memories, of refusing to see that she had changed while I had stayed the same. She insisted that she had grown over the years, evolved with the times, while I had remained stagnant, and that was why she felt so disconnected from me. My mind was spinning, so I asked her, bluntly, what exactly she wanted from our marriage. She hesitated, looking nervous, before finally admitting that she and her therapist had come to a conclusion: an open marriage might be the answer. I stared at her, stunned. I told her immediately that I didn't believe in open marriages. Carla, however, wasn't fazed. She argued that even if I didn't, she did. She said that opening up our marriage could bring back the excitement she felt was missing, allowing her to rediscover herself, while still remaining married to me. She assured me that if I wasn't comfortable with being with other people, that was fine, but she wanted the freedom to explore other options without guilt. I was floored. I could barely process what I was hearing. How could sleeping with strangers fix what was broken between us? And even more importantly, what kind of therapist was encouraging this? I had assumed Carla was going to therapy to work on herself, to find clarity, and heal from whatever was making her withdraw. But instead, this so-called therapist had done nothing but fuel her worst impulses, convincing her that the only way to find happiness was by seeking it outside of our marriage. I told Carla that if she was unhappy, she didn't have to go through all this mental gymnastics about excitement and rediscovery. She could just ask for a divorce. I made it clear that if she no longer wanted to be with me, she could be honest about it rather than dressing it up as a need for something new. I told her point blank, if she wanted to sleep with other people, she didn't need to be married to me. But to my surprise, she resisted. She said she wanted to stay married to me. She explained that she valued me, that I was dependable, reliable, someone who provided the stability she appreciated. Yet, in the same breath, she told me that the spark between us was gone. And in her mind, the solution wasn't fixing what was broken, it was changing the rules entirely. She tried to sell me on the idea that this could spice up our marriage, that it could be good for both of us. I told her I needed time to think. This wasn't something I could just decide on the spot. But over the next few days, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that an open marriage wasn't the real issue. The issue was that I no longer recognized my wife. She had changed so drastically that I felt like I was living with a stranger. Her entire demeanor had shifted. She dressed differently now, wearing more revealing and attention-grabbing outfits. She was glued to her phone at all hours, completely engrossed in conversations with people I didn't know. She had fully embraced a lifestyle that had no room for the values we had once built our life around. She barely acknowledged me. She didn't engage with me, didn't care about maintaining our home, didn't seem to value the relationship we had once worked so hard to protect. I felt less like a husband and more like a convenient roommate, someone who was there to provide stability while she went off and lived her new life. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't want this version of Carla. I didn't want a partner who needed other people to feel whole. I didn't want a wife who saw marriage as something that could be adjusted to fit her fleeting desires. I had spent months trying to be patient, trying to support her, trying to give her the space she said she needed. But in the end, the woman I had loved was gone, and in her place was someone I could no longer see a future with. And that realization hurt more than anything. Maybe it was finally time to let go. I had done everything I could to salvage our marriage, but it was clear that no amount of effort on my part would ever be enough. After 2 weeks of careful consideration, I sat Carla down and told her I wanted a divorce. I laid out all the reasons I had already expressed, and made it clear that I wasn't going to change my mind. I urged her not to fight me on this. I just wanted a clean break. But Carla didn't take it well. She immediately became defensive, accusing me of overreacting and insisting that asking for a divorce was far too extreme. In her mind, I was being too sensitive, unwilling to simply adapt to the changes she wanted. I kept my composure and explained that this wasn't about sensitivity. It was about the fact that I didn't want the kind of marriage she was proposing. She couldn't force me to accept something that went against everything I believed in. The more I stood my ground, the angrier she became. Then, as expected, she flipped the script. Instead of acknowledging her role in the situation, she turned the blame on me, insisting that I was the one unwilling to work on our marriage, that I had been the problem all along. I wasn't even surprised. Carla had always had a knack for gaslighting me, twisting situations to avoid taking responsibility for anything. I attempted to reason with her, but it was pointless. She wasn't listening, and I wasn't going to waste my breath arguing with someone who refused to see the truth. So I told her flat out that she needed to leave. This was my house. If we were done, then there was no reason for her to stay. That was when she snapped. Carla screamed that I had no right to kick her out and went as far as to threaten me, saying that if I actually went through with the divorce, she would ruin my life. Her hostility only made me more certain that I was making the right decision. I calmly warned her not to escalate things further, but it was clear she wasn't going to leave quietly. She stormed through the house in a full-blown tantrum, knocking things over, slamming doors. She even went outside and scratched my car before finally leaving. Thankfully, I had documented everything, pictures of the damage, records of her outbursts, because I had a feeling I would need them. It was a pathetic, painful end to what had once been a relationship full of love and trust. Since moving out, Carla has been relentless, texting me insults, mocking my masculinity, and spreading lies around town, telling anyone who will listen that I heartlessly threw her out and refused to fight for our marriage. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who has reached out with support. I'm not naive. I can see now that Carla was probably having an affair long before she suggested an open marriage. She must have wanted the appearance of a committed marriage, while also having the freedom to do whatever she wanted behind my back. As for why she did this, I have no idea. Maybe she never truly loved me. Maybe over time, she just stopped loving me. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. She continues to send me voicemails, berating me, playing the victim, blaming me for everything. But honestly, I'm exhausted. I'm just done with her manipulations. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. Carla has been texting and calling nonstop, begging me to meet with her. I ignored her at first, but eventually, I agreed, thinking that maybe she had finally come to her senses. Maybe she was ready to talk like an adult and take some responsibility for everything that happened. I should have known better. The moment we sat down, she launched into another ridiculous speech, claiming that her therapist believed I was abandoning our marriage just because things had gotten tough. Apparently, I was the one failing as a husband. According to her therapist, I was breaking my vows by refusing to accept Carla's new lifestyle. Then came the real kicker. Carla actually offered to take me back, on her terms. I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. I played along, just to see what insanity she would spew next. She told me that if I wanted to stay married to her, I had to agree to an open relationship and let her quit her job so she could live stress-free. That was it. That was her big compromise. I almost thought she was joking. How could she possibly double down on these demands after everything? Did she seriously believe I would even consider this after the way she had treated me? Her lack of self-awareness was astounding. I looked her in the eye and told her, with absolute certainty, that I would never agree to any of it because I was done with our marriage. And then I dropped the final blow. I told her I had already spoken to a lawyer and was in the process of filing for divorce. That was when the color drained from her face. Her whole demeanor shifted. The anger disappeared, replaced by something I hadn't expected. Desperation. For the first time, Carla looked genuinely afraid. She hesitated, then softly asked if I was really leaving her. I nodded. There was nothing left between us. I had spent months fighting for a relationship that no longer existed, clinging to a version of Carla that had died long ago. I was done. And then, out of nowhere, she broke down in tears. The sight of her crying caught me completely off guard. It was the last thing I expected. I let out a slow breath, watching Carla break down in front of me. For the first time in months, she was finally being honest, or at least, I hoped she was. Gently, I asked her to calm down and explain why she was reacting this way. I mean, after everything that had happened, was she really this heartbroken over my decision? Had she seriously not seen this coming? As I watched her sob, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind all of this. So I asked her, point blank, to tell me the truth. And to my surprise, she actually did. Carla admitted that about a year ago, she had reconnected with an old high school friend named Elle at their class reunion. Apparently, Elle had built some kind of social media following as a self-proclaimed relationship expert. Over time, she and Elle started spending more time together. Their friendship rekindled through long conversations and regular meetups. Little by little, Elle became a major influence in her life, one that, as she now realized, had completely poisoned her perspective on our marriage. According to Carla, Elle was the one who first planted the idea that she looked unhappy in our relationship. He started questioning her about me. Was I still exciting? Did she still feel fulfilled? Had she settled too soon? As Carla opened up about our life together, Elle wasted no time tearing it apart. He repeatedly criticized our marriage, calling it restrictive, dull, suffocating. He reminded Carla of how wild and carefree she used to be in high school, when she had multiple boyfriends, and how he had always expected her to stay that way. But now she had become boring, according to him. She had lost herself. And instead of reflecting on her own choices, Carla did what was easiest. She started to blame me. She resented the person she had become, and instead of acknowledging that she had chosen this life, she convinced herself that I had somehow trapped her in it. From that moment on, everything spiraled. Elle convinced her that the only way to reclaim her identity was to let go of her inhibitions, be spontaneous, and most importantly, seek out new experiences with other men. So when Carla's work trip came up 7 months ago, Elle encouraged her to use it as an opportunity to rediscover herself. He told her to flirt, to let loose, to see what it felt like to be wanted by someone new. After all, she would be far from home, away from me. So why not? And she listened. Carla admitted that she made out with someone during that trip. She refused to tell me who. She swore it was only a kiss, but honestly, At this point, I wasn't sure I believed anything she said. When she came home, she felt guilty, but not enough to tell me the truth. Instead, she ran straight to Elle. And rather than helping her process her emotions, Elle celebrated her actions. He told her that she was finally breaking free from the constraints of marriage. That she was evolving. That the guilt she felt? That was just the old Carla clinging on. She needed to let go. That's when everything changed. When Carla started going out to clubs, getting attention from other men, she loved it. It gave her a high she hadn't felt in years, validation, excitement, the thrill of something forbidden. And she didn't want to stop. She admitted that she knew it was wrong, but the more she did it, the harder it became to pull away. So when I suggested marriage counseling, she panicked. She was afraid that real therapy would force her to face herself, and she knew that if I ever found out the truth, I would leave her. So instead, she lied. She told me she was seeing a therapist, when in reality, she was just meeting up with Elle. They spent those sessions gossiping, venting, and further feeding into the growing resentment she had toward me. And the worst part? Carla had trusted him completely. She believed that he knew her better than anyone else. So when he told her that she deserved more, that she was missing out, that she had a right to chase after excitement, she internalized it completely. Every time I had tried to talk to her, every time I had expressed concern, every time I had reached out, Elle had whispered in her ear that I was controlling, that I was toxic, that I was holding her back. And then came the final push. It was Elle's idea for her to suggest an open marriage. He was so sure that if Carla pressured me enough, I would break, that I would cave, that I would accept it, and once I did, I would never question her again. But when I refused and instead kicked her out, everything unraveled. Carla confessed that she had wanted to tell me the truth after her affair, but Elle had manipulated her into maintaining control. He told her to keep me chasing after her, to never admit guilt, to make me feel like the one who needed to prove my love. Even before meeting me for lunch, he had advised her not to apologize. Instead, he told her to demand what she wanted. But his plan had failed. Instead of making me doubt myself, all of this had only solidified my decision to leave. And now, Carla knew she had lost me. That's why, finally, she broke down. She begged me not to leave. She swore that she had lost herself, that Elle had manipulated her, that she had been completely blinded by his influence. She told me she was finally seeing the damage she had caused. And now, she was willing to do anything to fix things. She promised to seek real therapy. She even said she would go to marriage counseling if I was open to it. She was desperate for one last chance. But I was not. I had spent months trying to save this marriage. I had given her space. I had been patient. I had offered her every opportunity to talk to me, and she had chosen time and time again to listen to him instead. Now, she wanted to undo it all. But it was too late. The woman sitting in front of me was not the woman I had fallen in love with. She had destroyed our marriage, not just through her actions, but through the sheer disregard she had shown for everything we had built together. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt done. So I looked at Carla, took a deep breath, and calmly said, "No." Update 3. Elle had undoubtedly played a role in Carla's downward spiral, but he wasn't the root cause of our marriage falling apart. She was. Carla made her own decisions, consciously and deliberately, for months. She could have come to me at any time, sat me down, and talked about how she was feeling. We could have worked through her doubts like adults. But instead, she chose deception. She bottled up her emotions, manipulated me, and let herself be consumed by Elle's twisted advice. She gaslighted me. She dismissed my concerns. She looked me in the eye and lied, again and again, while pretending everything was fine. And worst of all, she cheated. Now, only when she had lost all control over the situation, she was scrambling to come clean, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. But it was too late. I told her, calmly but firmly, that no amount of regret could fix what she had done. While I felt a sliver of sympathy for her sudden realization, I couldn't ignore the revulsion I felt toward the person she had become. The lies, the betrayal, the complete disregard for the life we had built together. It wasn't something I could just forgive and forget. She needed professional help to sort through the mess she had created, and I told her as much. I even offered to help her find a real therapist, one who could actually help her figure out where things had gone so wrong. But that was the extent of my generosity. As I walked away from that meeting, I saw the guilt written all over her face. Maybe, for the first time, she was truly sorry. But it didn't matter anymore. I was done. Update 4. I barely slept after that conversation. Something about all of this just wouldn't sit right. So on impulse, I decided to look up Elle on social media. Who was this man really? Carla had deliberately hidden their friendship from me for months, so of course, I wanted to know more. And I'll admit, I went deep. But I never expected to find what I did. It turns out, Elle and I shared a mutual friend. A guy I knew had gone to college with him. So I reached out and asked, "Hey, do you know this guy?" What I learned shocked me. Elle wasn't just some random bad influence. He was a professional homewrecker. According to my friend, Elle had spent years chasing after married women. He had a reputation, both in college and in his career, for actively seeking out women in committed relationships. But that wasn't even the worst part. Elle had always wanted to marry rich. Not for love. Not for companionship. Simply so he would never have to work a day in his life. And guess what? After college, he found a wealthy, older woman and married her quickly. But the entire time, he was cheating on her. With married women. With his wife's own acquaintances. It was a pattern. Eventually, his wife caught on and left him. But did he care? No. Because his only focus was securing alimony in the divorce. And after that? That's when he rebranded himself as a relationship guru. That's when he started giving advice online, advice specifically designed to sabotage committed relationships. It was clear now. Elle hadn't just been influencing Carla, he had been deliberately engineering the collapse of our marriage. And she had let him. Final update. It's been a month since I last shared an update. For those wondering, yes, I confronted Carla about Elle's real history. And as it turns out, she had no idea. She was stunned when I told her about his past, about the affairs, the manipulation, the alimony scheme. Everything. She had spent months blindly trusting this man. She had believed every word he said, let him twist her perception of our marriage, let him convince her that I was the problem. And now, she realized, he had played her just as much as she had played me. She looked humiliated. But let's be clear. I still blamed Carla more than I blamed Elle. Elle may have been the spark, but Carla was the one who had set the fire. She had been looking for an excuse to act out. Elle had simply handed her the perfect justification. She admitted how stupid she felt, realizing that she had been used as a pawn in someone else's twisted game. I told her flatly that it didn't matter anymore. I advised her to be more careful about who she listens to in the future. But beyond that, I was done. There was only one thing left to do. End this marriage. Carla finally agreed to the divorce. Now, according to our lawyers, the process should be simple. We have no joint assets. We have no children. There's nothing left tying us together.